The radio crackled with static at Forward Operating Base Kandahar, but Captain Marcus Reed barely glanced up from his tactical display. Another routine patrol gone sideways in the Helmand Valley. Another call for close air support that would take 40 minutes to arrive. He'd seen this script 1,000 times before in his 18 months commanding operations in Afghanistan's most volatile province. "Overlord, this is Viper 17, came the strained voice through the speakers. "We have 18 Taliban fighters in a coordinated ambush. Grid reference follows. We need immediate air support, over." Reed studied the digital map, noting the convoy's position 12 kilometers from the nearest firebase. The Taliban had chosen their killing ground well, a narrow valley with rocky outcroppings providing perfect cover for RPGs and small arms fire. His finger hovered over the drone deployment icon, calculating response times and weapon loadouts. Viper 17, be advised, we're spinning up Reaper drone support. ETA 35 minutes. Can you hold position? The response came back immediate and desperate. "Negative, Overlord. We're taking heavy fire. Lost 1 vehicle, 3 wounded. We need something now." Reed's operations officer, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, leaned over his shoulder. "Sir, we could vector in Ghost Rider. She's already airborne, running training exercises 20 clicks south." "Ghost Rider?" Reed's eyebrow arched. "You mean Lieutenant Colonel Kazama? What's she flying today?" "A-10 Thunderbolt, sir. Full combat load." Reed's jaw tightened. Maya Kazama, the Air Force pilot who transferred in 3 weeks ago with a reputation that preceded her like thunder before lightning. The brass called her a strategic asset. The enlisted called her something else entirely. Reed had heard the whispers. First woman to fly combat missions in the A-10, Distinguished Flying Cross recipient, 27 confirmed enemy kills. Also court-martialed twice for insubordination, and currently serving what amounted to exile duty after telling a 3-star general exactly what she thought of his tactical decisions. "Just send a drone," Reed muttered, reaching for the radio. "We don't need a cowboy today." But even as he spoke, something made him pause. Through the operations center's reinforced windows, he caught sight of movement in the southern sky, a dark speck against the afternoon clouds, growing larger with each passing second. The distinctive twin-engine growl reached them before the aircraft became fully visible, that unmistakable sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannons housing cutting through air. Reed's hand froze over the radio controls. Ghost Rider hadn't waited for permission. The radio exploded with Kazama's voice, calm as winter morning. "Overlord, this is Ghost Rider. I'm approximately 2 minutes out from Viper 17's position, requesting immediate clearance to engage." Reed stared at the approaching A-10 Thunderbolt II, its titanium armor gleaming in the desert sun. In 30 seconds, everything he thought he knew about protocol was about to change. "Sir," Chen whispered, "your orders." The convoy below was dying while he hesitated. Reed keyed the microphone, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. "Ghost Rider, you are cleared hot. Repeat, cleared hot." What happened next would haunt his dreams and change military doctrine forever. But in that moment, Captain Marcus Reed simply watched as Lieutenant Colonel Maya Kazama banked her aircraft toward the sound of gunfire, carrying death beneath her wings and something that looked suspiciously like hope. The A-10 Warthog dropped below the cloud line like a predator descending from heaven, and Reed realized he was holding his breath. In the valley below, 18 Taliban fighters were about to meet the woman they'd nicknamed Silent Thunder, for reasons none of them would live to explain. The radio crackled again. "Viper 17, this is Ghost Rider. Keep your heads down, boys. I'm bringing the lightning." Reed's hand trembled as he reached for his binoculars. Through the reinforced glass, he watched history unfold in real time. The A-10's nose dipped toward the earth, and Lieutenant Colonel Maya Kazama disappeared into the killing ground with nothing but skill, fury, and 30 millimeters of depleted uranium ammunition between life and death. Maya Kazama had been flying combat missions since she was 22, but the bureaucrats still treated her like an experiment. 6 years of proving herself in the cockpit, and they still whispered about her gender instead of her kill ratio. The A-10 Thunderbolt II felt like home beneath her hands, 10 tons of titanium armor and attitude, built around the most devastating aircraft cannon ever mounted on a flying machine. Ghost Rider, be advised you have multiple hostiles in prepared positions, came the controller's voice through her headset. Row is weapons tight until positive identification. Maya's radar warning receiver stayed silent as she descended toward the ambush site. The Taliban didn't have sophisticated air defense systems, but they were smart enough to use the terrain. Rocky outcroppings and shallow caves provided perfect concealment for RPG teams and heavy machine guns. Through her targeting pod's thermal imaging, she could see the convoy's desperate situation. 3 Humvees pinned down in a dry riverbed, muzzle flashes erupting from elevated positions on both sides of the valley. The geometry was textbook, a classic L-shaped ambush with nowhere to run. Viper 17, this is Ghost Rider. I have visual on your position. Can you mark hostile targets with smoke? Ghost Rider, we're taking too much fire to pop smoke. Enemy positions are in the rocks, approximately 200 meters north and east of our location. Maya banked the A-10 into a wide circle, studying the battlefield through her targeting systems. The GAU-8 cannon mounted in her aircraft's nose could fire 65 rounds per second, each projectile capable of penetrating tank armor. But precision was everything. One wrong burst, and she'd be explaining friendly fire casualties to families back home. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, adjusting targeting parameters and weapon selection. The A-10's engines hummed their familiar song, twin turbofans that could keep her airborne even with massive battle damage. She tested that capability more than once. Overlord, Ghost Rider requests permission to engage with 30 Mike. I have positive identification on hostile muzzle flashes. Reed's voice came back tight with tension. Ghost Rider, confirm you have separation between friendly and hostile forces. Confirmed, Overlord. Friendlies are in the riverbed, hostiles are elevated in prepared positions. I'm coming in from the south, gun run orientation north to south. Maya rolled the aircraft into her attack profile, feeling the familiar weight of G-forces pressing her into the ejection seat. Through the heads-up display, targeting reticles aligned with thermal signatures in the rocks above the convoy. 3 seconds to weapons release. 2 seconds. 1. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with a sound like tearing metal, sending a stream of depleted uranium projectiles downrange at 3,000 feet per second. Rock exploded into dust clouds as the 30mm rounds found their targets. Maya pulled up hard, climbing away from the valley floor while her targeting pod recorded the results. Viper 17, this is Ghost Rider. How copy that gun run? The response came back jubilant. Ghost Rider, that was beautiful. You silenced the machine gun nest on the North Ridge, still taking fire from the eastern positions. Maya was already banking for her second attack run, muscle memory guiding the aircraft through combat maneuvers she'd practiced 10,000 times. The A-10 responded like an extension of her will, heavy but responsive, built for exactly this kind of close support mission. Through her canopy, she could see the convoy beginning to move, seizing the initiative while the enemy was suppressed. This was why she flew, not for medals or recognition, but for moments like this when her skill meant the difference between soldiers going home to their families or coming home in flag-draped boxes. The eastern ridge lit up with muzzle flashes as Taliban fighters adjusted their positions. Maya smiled grimly behind her oxygen mask and lined up for another gun run. The conversation was just beginning. Maya's second gun run came in low and fast. the A-10's titanium bathtub protecting her from small arms fire as she descended toward the eastern ridge. The aircraft shuddered as the GAU-8 cannon spoke again, each burst precisely calculated to avoid the convoy while devastating enemy positions. Rock and debris fountained skyward as depleted uranium rounds shredded Taliban fighting positions. Good hits," came the excited voice from Viper 17. "You got the RPG team on the eastern slope. We're starting to move." But Maya's targeting pod was already picking up movement in the northern valley mouth, reinforcements arriving on motorcycles and pickup trucks. The original ambush was expanding into something larger, more coordinated. She keyed her radio while climbing to assess the new threat. "Overlord, this is Ghost Rider. Be advised I'm seeing additional hostiles approaching from the north. Approximately 12 vehicles, mixed motorcycles and technicals. Looks like they're trying to close the escape route." Reed's voice came back grim. "Copy, Ghost Rider. Viper 17, can you break contact and move south?" "Negative, Overlord. We've got one vehicle down with mechanical issues. Can't abandon our wounded." Maya felt the familiar weight of decision settling on her shoulders. The convoy was trapped between the original ambush site and fresh Taliban reinforcements. Her A-10 carried enough ammunition for maybe 4 more substantial gun runs before she'd need to return to base. Mathematics and mortality intersecting in the harsh calculus of combat. "Ghost Rider, this is Overlord. What's your fuel and ammunition status?" "Overlord, I've got 40 minutes of fuel and approximately 800 rounds of 30 mic remaining. Also carrying 2 Maverick missiles if we need precision strikes." Through her targeting pod, Maya watched the Taliban reinforcements spreading out to establish blocking positions. They moved with tactical discipline that suggested experienced fighters, possibly foreign advisors. The kind of enemy that didn't break and run when aircraft appeared overhead. Her threat warning system chimed softly. Someone down there had just illuminated her aircraft with targeting radar. Primitive by Western standards, but dangerous enough to demand respect. Maya began evasive maneuvers, varying her altitude and heading while maintaining visual contact with the ground situation. "Viper 17, this is Ghost Rider. I'm showing possible air defense activity in your area. Recommend you button up and prepare for immediate movement when I give the word." The convoy commander's voice came back tight with stress. "Roger, Ghost Rider. We're ready to move on your signal. Just get us a hole in their line." Maya studied the tactical display, processing angles and timing with the cold precision that had kept her alive through 6 years of combat missions. The northern blocking force was her primary target. Neutralize their heavy weapons, and the convoy might punch through before the enemy could reorganize. She rolled into a steep diving attack, the A-10's engine screaming as she descended toward the valley mouth where Taliban fighters were setting up machine gun positions. The targeting reticle settled on a pickup truck mounting what looked like a heavy machine gun or recoilless rifle. "Viper 17, stand by for fireworks." The Maverick missile dropped cleanly from its underwing pylon, its seeker head locking onto the thermal signature of the enemy vehicle. Maya pulled up hard as the missile streaked downrange, counting seconds until impact. The explosion sent a pillar of black smoke into the clear Afghan sky, and suddenly the Taliban blocking force was scrambling for new positions. "Direct hit on the heavy weapon," Maya reported. "Viper 17, you've got about 30 seconds of confusion down there. Move now." Through her targeting pod, she watched the convoy surge forward, escaping the riverbed trap and racing toward the gap she'd created in the enemy line. But the fight was far from over. The original ambush force was repositioning to pursue, and Maya's ammunition was running dangerously low. The radio crackled with a new voice, deep, authoritative, speaking accented English. "American pilot, you have interfered for the last time. We know who you are, Silent Thunder. Today you die." Maya's blood ran cold. Somehow, impossibly, they knew her call sign, the name her enemies had given her after too many night raids and close support missions. This wasn't random Taliban harassment, this was personal. She keyed her radio with steady hands despite the ice forming in her stomach. Viper 17, we may have a problem. Captain Reed's hands were white-knuckled on his coffee cup as he watched the tactical display update in real time. Red icons representing enemy forces were multiplying faster than his computers could process, and Ghost Rider's blue symbol moved through them like a shark among minnows. But sharks could bleed, and Maya Kazama was outnumbered 50-1. "Sir, we're picking up increased radio chatter in the valley," reported Sergeant Williams from the intelligence station. "Multiple Taliban commanders coordinating movement. This isn't opportunistic. They were waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Reed demanded, though a cold suspicion was already forming in his mind. "Sir, I think they were waiting for her, Ghost Rider. The radio intercepts mentioned Silent Thunder specifically. They knew she was coming." Reed's blood pressure spiked as the implications hit him. This wasn't a random convoy ambush. This was an elaborate trap designed to bring down one specific pilot. The Taliban had sacrificed 18 fighters in the initial contact just to lure Maya Kazama into a killing ground where they could finish what they'd started months ago. On the tactical display, Ghost Rider's symbol was surrounded by red hostile icons stretching across 3 grid squares. Maya was flying directly into the most sophisticated Taliban air defense network Reed had ever seen deployed. "Ghost Rider, this is Overlord," he transmitted urgently. "Break contact immediately and return to base. We're seeing massive enemy reinforcement in your area of operations." Maya's voice came back calm and professional. "Negative, Overlord. Viper 17 is still in contact and taking casualties. I'm not abandoning them." "Ghost Rider, that's a direct order. Return to base immediately." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of static and distant gunfire. When Maya finally responded, her voice carried an edge Reed had never heard before. "Overlord, with respect, I've got Americans dying down here. Send me backup or get out of my way, but I'm not leaving." Reed closed his eyes, knowing he was about to make a decision that would either save lives or end careers. Possibly both. Maya Kazama was disobeying a direct order, but she was also the only thing standing between a convoy of wounded soldiers and a Taliban force that had planned this operation for months. "Lieutenant Chen," he said quietly, "get me a direct line to Bagram Air Base. Tell them we need immediate air support in Grid Square, Quebec 74. Everything they've got." "Sir, that will take 20 minutes minimum." "Then we better hope Ghost Rider can hold out for 20 minutes. Through the operations center's windows, Reed could see contrails forming in the thin mountain air as Maya's A-10 maneuvered for another attack run. She was burning fuel at an unsustainable rate, pushing the aircraft's engines to their limits while dodging ground fire from positions that seemed to sprout from the rocks themselves. "Sir," Williams called from the intelligence station, "we're picking up radio chatter about man-portable air defense systems, MA and PADS. The Taliban are moving surface-to-air missiles into position." Reed felt his stomach drop. MA and PADS, shoulder-fired missiles capable of bringing down aircraft at low altitude. The A-10 was built to survive ground fire, but even the Warthog's legendary toughness had limits. One lucky shot with a heat-seeking missile could end Maya's war permanently. "Ghost Rider, be advised we have reports of surface-to-air missile activity in your area. Recommend you increase altitude and—" Maya's voice cut through his transmission. "Overlord, I'm already seeing missile launches. 2, possibly 3 heat seekers in the air, going defensive." Reed watched helplessly as Ghost Rider's symbol on the tactical display began a series of violent evasive maneuvers. Somewhere in that valley, Maya Kazama was fighting for her life while trying to protect soldiers who depended on her. And Reed was stuck in an air-conditioned operations center, reduced to watching icons move across a computer screen. "Sir," Chen said quietly, "if we lose her." "We're not losing her," Reed replied with more confidence than he felt. "Ghost Rider's been through worse." But even as he spoke, Reed was calculating odds and ammunition loads, fuel consumption, and enemy capabilities. The mathematics of aerial combat were unforgiving, and Maya Kazama was running out of everything except determination. On the radio, her voice remained steady despite the chaos. "Viper 17, I'm going to try something stupid. When you see smoke on the northern ridge, move like hell toward the extraction point." Reed leaned forward in his chair. Something stupid usually meant something brilliant when Maya Kazama was flying, but it also meant something dangerous enough to get court-martialed, if she survived long enough for a court-martial. Maya felt the first missile pass close enough to trigger her threat warning system, the heat-seeker's proximity fuse activating just seconds after she'd released chaff and pulled into a violent climbing turn. The A-10 groaned under the G-forces, but the titanium bathtub around her cockpit held firm. She'd been in worse situations, though at the moment she couldn't remember when. "Ghost Rider, we're showing 3 more missile launches," came Overlord's tense voice. "Recommend immediate egress from the area." "Negative, Overlord. Viper 17 is still trapped down there." Maya banked hard left as another heat-seeker streaked past her canopy, close enough to see the missile's fins stabilizing its flight path. The Taliban had positioned their air defense teams well, multiple launch points creating overlapping fields of fire that forced her to choose between protecting the convoy and protecting herself. Through her targeting pod, she could see the soldiers below taking heavy casualties while they waited for an extraction that might never come. Wounded men were being dragged behind disabled vehicles, while enemy fire poured down from elevated positions. The sight made her decision easy, even if it violated every principle of aerial survival she'd ever learned. "Viper 17, this is Ghost Rider. I'm going to try to suppress their air defense positions, but I need to come in low and slow. Real low." "Ghost Rider, that's suicide with MANPADS in the area." Maya was already pushing the A-10 into a shallow dive, lining up on the thermal signatures of missile launch teams scattered across the northern ridge. The GAU-8 cannon had enough ammunition for one more sustained burst, maybe 2 minutes of firing time if she was careful with her trigger control. "Sometimes you have to get dangerous to do the job," she muttered into her oxygen mask, echoing words her instructor had spoken 6 years ago during her first combat mission. The A-10 descended toward the deck, flying barely 50 feet above the rocky terrain while her targeting systems tracked multiple threats. Maya's hands moved with automatic precision, adjusting flight controls and weapons parameters while her mind calculated angles and distances with the cold efficiency of a human computer. At this altitude, the Taliban could engage her with everything from rifle fire to rocket-propelled grenades. But it also meant her cannon fire would be devastatingly accurate, each burst of depleted uranium projectiles precisely delivered to enemy positions that had nowhere to hide. 30 seconds out, she announced over the radio. "Viper 17, get ready to move." The first missile launch came from her 2 o'clock, a shoulder-fired heat-seeker that streaked toward her aircraft like an angry wasp. Maya rolled inverted and pulled negative Gs, using the A-10's unusual flight characteristics to break the missile's lock while staying low enough to maintain visual contact with ground targets. The GAU-8 cannon erupted as she rolled wings level, sending a stream of 30mm death across the northern ridge. Rock and debris exploded skyward as her rounds found their marks, silencing machine gun positions and scattering Taliban fighters who'd been preparing to launch more missiles. Good hits, came the excited voice from Viper 17. "You got the whole northern line. We're moving now." But Maya's threat warning system was screaming as more missiles appeared on her display. The Taliban had anticipated her low-altitude attack and positioned reserve teams specifically to exploit it. She was flying directly into a carefully prepared killing ground with nowhere to run except up, and up meant giving the enemy time to reorganize and trap the convoy again. "Ghost Rider, you've got 4 more missiles in the air," Overlord reported grimly. "Break contact immediately." Maya looked down at the convoy racing across open ground toward the extraction point, soldiers hanging on to damaged vehicles while enemy fire pursued them across the valley floor. In 30 seconds, they'd be clear. In 30 seconds, she could pull up and egress safely. But 30 seconds was a lifetime when missiles were tracking your aircraft. She made her choice with the calm certainty that had characterized every major decision of her military career. Instead of climbing to safety, Maya Kazama pushed the A-10 even lower, using terrain masking and violent maneuvering to confuse the incoming missiles while her cannon continued its deadly work. The radio exploded with voices, Overlord screaming for her to break contact, Viper 17 reporting they were clear of the killing ground, and somewhere in the background, a Taliban commander cursing in accented English as his carefully planned ambush dissolved into chaos. Maya smiled grimly behind her oxygen mask and prepared to find out whether the A-10's legendary toughness was legend or reality. The first missile struck Maya's A-10 just behind the right engine nacelle, the explosion sending shrapnel through hydraulic lines and electrical systems, while the aircraft shuddered under the impact. Warning lights erupted across her instrument panel like Christmas decorations, each red glow representing a system that was either damaged or completely offline. "Ghost Rider taking hits," she reported with clinical calm, though her hands were already working to assess the damage. "Lost hydraulics on the right side, engine fire warning on number 2. The A-10 had been designed to survive exactly this kind of punishment. Dual hydraulic systems, manual reversion capability, and engines mounted high enough to avoid ground fire damage. But design specifications meant nothing when missiles were still tracking your aircraft, and you were flying barely 50 feet above hostile terrain. "Ghost Rider, this is Overlord. Status report." "Still flying, Overlord. Viper 17, what's your status?" "Ghost Rider, we're clear of the valley and moving toward extraction. All personnel accounted for. You saved our lives." Maya allowed herself one moment of satisfaction before the second missile detonated against her left wing root, tearing away chunks of aluminum and titanium, while severing fuel lines that began bleeding JP-8 into the slipstream. The A-10 lurched violently to the left, and suddenly she was fighting to maintain controlled flight with an aircraft that was rapidly becoming more scrap metal than flying machine. "Number 2 engine is on fire," she announced, reaching for the fire suppression controls. "Shutting down and discharging bottle." The right engine spun down to silence, leaving her with single-engine power and a rapidly deteriorating flight control situation. Through her canopy, she could see fuel streaming from her damaged wing, creating a vapor trail that marked her position for every Taliban fighter in the valley. "Ghost Rider, you need to eject," came Reed's urgent voice over the radio. "That aircraft is not going to make it back to base." Maya looked at her instruments, mentally calculating fuel consumption, flight time to friendly territory, and the odds of keeping the battered A-10 airborne long enough to matter. The numbers weren't encouraging, but she'd never been one to give up easily. "Negative, Overlord. I've still got flight controls and one good engine. I'm going to try to make it to the emergency strip at Firebase Charlie." Firebase Charlie was a small forward operating base 20 minutes flying time to the south. If she could maintain altitude and airspeed with a damaged aircraft that was bleeding fuel and hydraulic fluid. The alternative was ejection over Taliban-controlled territory, which meant either capture or death. Ghost Rider, be advised Firebase Charlie's runway is only 3,500 feet long, not long enough for a normal landing. Then I guess it won't be a normal landing, Maya replied, banking the wounded aircraft toward the south while her engine fire warning continued its urgent chiming. Behind her, the Taliban were regrouping and pursuing, probably hopping to finish what their missiles had started. But Maya Kazama wasn't done fighting yet. The A-10 might be damaged, but it was still the most survivable close-support aircraft ever built. And she was still the pilot who'd earned the nickname Silent Thunder by refusing to quit when the odds went against her. Overlord, this is Ghost Rider. Request immediate medical and crash response teams at Firebase Charlie. I'm coming in hot with battle damage, and this landing is going to be interesting. Reed's voice came back tight with concern. Roger, Ghost Rider. Emergency crews are already rolling. Bring her home. Maya checked her fuel gauge and grimaced. 20 minutes to Firebase Charlie, but only 15 minutes of fuel remaining. The mathematics of survival were getting ugly, but she'd made worse numbers work before. Usually. She adjusted trim tabs and power settings, nursing the damaged aircraft through the thin mountain air while scanning the horizon for the Firebase's runway. Behind her, black smoke marked where her cannon fire had devastated Taliban positions. Ahead lay the possibility of living long enough to face the court-martial she'd probably earned by disobeying direct orders. At the moment, court-martial seemed like a reasonable price for keeping American soldiers alive. Maya's remaining engine began running rough at 15,000 feet, the turbofan coughing and surging as damaged fuel lines struggled to deliver consistent flow. She could see Firebase Charlie ahead, a small patch of cleared ground surrounded by razor wire and sandbags, looking impossibly short for an aircraft that usually needed 5,000 feet of runway. Firebase Charlie Tower, this is Ghost Rider inbound with emergency landing. Single engine, battle damage, low fuel. Request immediate clearance and crash response. Ghost Rider, Firebase Charlie. You're cleared to land any runway, winds calm. Emergency crews standing by. Be advised our runway is only 3,500 feet. Maya grimaced behind her oxygen mask. The A-10's normal landing distance was over 4,000 feet, and that was with a fully functional aircraft. She was coming in with damaged flight controls, single-engine power, and landing gear that might or might not deploy properly. Charlie Tower, I'm going to need the cable. Every military runway had an emergency arresting cable, similar to aircraft carrier systems, designed to stop aircraft that couldn't brake normally. Maya had never used one before, but the A-10's manual covered the procedure, assuming the aircraft held together long enough to attempt it. She lowered the landing gear and watched 3 green lights illuminate on her instrument panel. At least something was still working properly. The damaged wing was still bleeding fuel, but at her current consumption rate, she might have enough to complete the approach. Ghost Rider, you're 4 miles out. Contact Firebase Charlie approach on frequency 247.7. Maya switched radio frequencies while adjusting her approach angle. The Firebase's runway looked like a postage stamp ahead, surrounded by hostile mountains and defended by soldiers who were probably wondering why an A-10 was streaming smoke and fuel as it approached their remote outpost. Firebase Charlie approach. Ghost Rider with you 4 miles out. Emergency approach. Ghost Rider, Firebase Charlie. We have you on radar. Report when ready for arresting cable approach. The arresting cable was a last resort. A thick steel cable stretched across the runway that could stop an aircraft through pure brute force. Using it meant accepting significant risk of structural damage, but Maya's alternatives were rapidly disappearing along with her fuel supply. Charlie approach, Ghost Rider ready for cable approach. I'll be coming in fast and steep. She pushed the nose down, trading altitude for airspeed while her wounded aircraft groaned under the stress. The A-10's titanium structure was legendary for its strength, but every system had limits. Through her canopy, she could see the arresting cable stretched across the runway like a thin line between success and catastrophe. 1 mile out, she reported. Gear down, hook down. The A-10's arresting hook extended beneath the aircraft's tail, a last-ditch system borrowed from Carrier Aviation and modified for emergency use. Maya had practiced this approach in simulators, but never with a battle-damaged aircraft that was barely controllable. Firebase Charlie's runway rushed toward her at 150 knots, the arresting cable growing larger in her windscreen with each passing second. Maya held her breath as the aircraft's hook contacted the cable with a tremendous jerk, transferring the A-10's kinetic energy into the arresting system's hydraulic dampers. The deceleration was brutal, pressing her forward against her restraint harness while the aircraft groaned and shuddered under forces it was never designed to experience. But it worked. The A-10 rolled to a stop barely 50 feet from the runway's end, smoke rising from overheated brakes and damaged systems. Maya sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands shaking slightly as adrenaline finally caught up with her. Through the canopy, she could see emergency crews running toward her aircraft, firefighters and medics ready to deal with whatever they found inside the battered Warthog. She keyed her radio one last time. Charlie Tower, Ghost Rider is on the ground and secure. Aircraft is code 3, pilot uninjured. As she began emergency shutdown procedures, Maya wondered if she'd still have a career after today's performance. But looking back toward the valley where Viper 17's convoy had escaped certain death, she decided some things were worth the risk. The A-10's canopy opened with a hydraulic hiss, and Maya Kazama climbed out of the cockpit to face whatever consequences awaited a pilot who'd saved lives by breaking rules. Captain Reed stood in the Firebase Charlie operations bunker 3 hours later, watching Maya Kazama through reinforced glass as she sat in a folding chair, still wearing her flight suit and answering questions from a colonel who'd flown in from Bagram. Her hands were steady now, wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold, while she explained her tactical decisions to investigators who hadn't been there. She disobeyed a direct order, Reed said quietly to Lieutenant Chen, who'd accompanied him on the helicopter flight south. I told her to break contact and return to base. Sir, respectfully, she saved 18 lives today. Viper 17 would have been wiped out without her intervention. Reed watched Maya gesture toward a tactical map, probably explaining her gun runs and missile evasion techniques to officers who would decide whether she faced court-martial or commendation. Her voice was too quiet to hear through the glass, but her posture remained professional despite the exhaustion that must be weighing on her shoulders. The Taliban knew who she was, Reed continued. They called her Silent Thunder over the radio. This whole ambush was designed to kill her specifically. Chen nodded grimly. Intelligence is calling it a high-value target elimination attempt. Maya's been too effective in close air support missions. The Taliban wanted her off the board permanently. Through the window, Reed could see the battle-damaged A-10 being examined by maintenance crews. The aircraft looked like it had been through a metal shredder, holes in the wings, scorched engine nacelle, hydraulic fluid staining the concrete beneath. That Maya had managed to fly it 20 minutes to Firebase Charlie was either exceptional skill or exceptional luck. Probably both. Sir, Colonel Morrison wants to see you, announced a sergeant from the bunker's entrance. Reed straightened his uniform and walked into the briefing room where Maya sat across from a gray-haired colonel whose ribbon rack indicated extensive combat experience. Morrison looked up as Reed entered, his expression unreadable. Captain Reed, I understand you were the controlling authority for today's mission. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Kazama was operating under my tactical control when she responded to Viper 17's emergency. Morrison consulted his notes. and you ordered her to break contact and return to base. Reed felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. His answer could determine Maya's future in the Air Force, and possibly his own. But looking at the pilot who'd risked everything to save soldiers she'd never met, the choice was surprisingly easy. Sir, I issued that order based on incomplete intelligence. Lieutenant Colonel Kazama had better situational awareness from her position over the target area. Her tactical judgment proved correct. Morrison's eyebrow arched slightly. You're saying her disobedience was justified. Sir, I'm saying her action saved 18 American lives. Whatever disciplinary action follows, that fact remains unchanged. Maya looked up from her coffee cup, meeting Reed's eyes for the first time since landing. Her expression was unreadable, but Reed thought he saw something that might have been gratitude. Morrison closed his folder and stood. Lieutenant Colonel Kazama, you'll be pleased to know that Viper 17's convoy made it to extraction with no additional casualties. The wounded are stable and being evacuated to Germany. Thank you, sir. That's all that matters. Is it? Because I have a stack of tactical reports here describing the most sophisticated Taliban air defense network we've seen in this theater. They expended significant resources trying to bring down one specific pilot. That suggests you've become more than just a tactical asset. You're a strategic target. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, are you grounding me? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the pilot who'd earned equal measures of admiration and consternation during her 6 years of combat missions. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of command decisions that affected lives and careers. Lieutenant Colonel, you're being transferred to Bagram Air Base effective immediately. New assignment, expanded responsibilities. The Taliban wanted you off the board, but were putting you center stage instead. Reed watched Maya's reaction carefully. After today's performance, she deserved recognition rather than punishment. But he also knew that increased visibility meant increased risk, and the enemy had already demonstrated their willingness to expend significant resources targeting her specifically. Outside the bunker, the sun was setting over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded Reed why soldiers called this place beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Maya Kazama packed her,